Joanne spent all summer preparing. Okay, you said it, not me. She spent all summer crying in anticipation, and she was pretty good by the time we got home. I was the one curled in the fetal position in the corner of the house, sobbing uncontrollably. So I can't promise what I'll be like by Wednesday, but yeah, we're doing that on Tuesday. Want to welcome everybody who's watching on Facebook. If you're watching live or if you're watching later on while through the tape, thank you for that. Continue to share the video. Don't forget of all the ways you can connect with us. If you're out of town, you can still connect with us through the website. We're glad you're here today. So it was at the church we served immediately prior to coming to this church. And we had a vibrant Wednesday night ministry there, complete with dinner. It was offered every Wednesday night during the school year. Sounds familiar, right? And this particular night that I'm thinking of was the Wednesday night of the week prior to Thanksgiving. So not the night before Thanksgiving, but the week prior on Wednesday night, I had offered to be responsible for the production of that meal, and it was going to be an all-church Thanksgiving dinner. So I planned the meal fairly well, thank you very much, but I failed to plan on enough help. It was a busy week, and I got caught up in the everyday ministry, and I convinced myself that it could be done just fine with the limited help that I had lined up. And in the end, the meal was served on time and under budget, and to a very complimentary group of people who showed up to eat it. So in that sense, winner, turkey dinner. But getting there proved to be a much bigger challenge than I had planned, because it was partway into the cooking that day that I realized I didn't have enough help. And I began to seriously worry. I could tell we were in some danger. I was in some danger of not getting the dinner done by the time people were expecting it to be served. And you know, those kind of trains need to run relatively closely on time. So I'm a little worried about that. So I kicked it into high gear. Everything went into kind of fast motion, more than slightly panicked mode. And you know, you move faster. When you move faster, you make mistakes. And that's when it happened. I was taking turkeys out of the ovens there in the kitchen at the church so that they could rest a bit and be carved. And also so we could get all the drippings, all the juice out of them to make the gravy, right? So that's my job at that moment, is getting turkeys out of the oven. I cooked them in the bags, the baking bags. I believe wholeheartedly in baking bags. But this particular baking bag had ruptured late in the game. So, I mean, I had it in a pan that contained the liquid, but the liquid was no longer contained to the bag. It was loose in the pan. And I moved too quickly, and I sloshed turkey drippings, the juice, all over the floor outside the oven. I bit my tongue very hard to not say anything bad, and I really didn't have time to properly clean it up at the moment. So I set the turkey down. I mopped it up as best I could, but frankly, the best I could, I just didn't have time to get a degreaser out and actually do the floor very well. So the end result was what amounted to an oil spill right there in front of the oven in a fairly decent area in a fairly small kitchen that didn't have a ton of room to move through that part of the kitchen. So the other problem was, if you were going to go almost anywhere in that kitchen, you had to pass through that area. So you couldn't just avoid it very much. Well, I quickly figured out that since I didn't have time to stop and clean it up properly, the only safe way to move through it was, instead of picking up your feet and trying to walk and, doing this, instead, the safer way was to keep your feet flat on the floor and kind of slide through it, right? So I want you to imagine, I spent the last 30 minutes of dinner prep that night looking like one of those Olympic speed skaters, as I skated through the kitchen. It was both interesting and more than a little embarrassing. So today we continue our current sermon series, The Five Sacrifices, based on that list found in the Old Testament book of Leviticus. Been talking about that. How it includes some powerful views on how to connect with God. How it's also seen by Christians as a bridge to Jesus in the New Testament. And how these offerings of the law give us a pattern on how to approach God. Remember, the first week we started with the burnt sacrifice, the burnt offering, and we said it was the first step for loving God more completely. Last week we moved to the meal sacrifice. It was a grain offering that focused on a life dedicated to generosity and giving. And today we look at the peace offering, which focuses on praise and thanksgiving, and it's found in the 3rd chapter of the book of Leviticus. Hear these words.
If your offering is a peace offering, and you offer an animal from the herd, whether male or female, you are to present before the Lord an animal without defect. Then Aaron's sons are to burn it on the altar, on top of the burnt offering that is lying on the burning wood. It is a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord.
So now, like I said last week, by now you're going, dude, you're just yanking her chain now. She's reading the same scripture every week. You're just telling us it's from a different chapter. I swear, it's not. It's Leviticus 3. Here's the deal. We're going to take a closer look like we did last week. Week 1 scripture was about a livestock offering, and it was a burnt offering, burnt completely, consumed completely by the fire. Last week was the meal sacrifice. Remember, meal meant grain in that case. And it focused on a life dedicated to generosity and giving. And the grain wasn't completely consumed by the fire, but it was a handful of it that was, and the rest of the grain was then given to the priests to consume as part of their meal. This one, the peace offering, is back to livestock, but it's a meal. And this week, meal doesn't mean grain, but meal means one of the things you eat throughout the day, breakfast, lunch, dinner. This is a meal shared with God and the priests and the common folk all together. So the way it worked, worshiper brought the livestock, again, looking for the best of the livestock, and they brought it like they did the burnt offering. The animal was sacrificed, it was cleaned, it was prepped. Here in the Midwest, we would call that probably field dressing. And then the fat and the entrails, basically the scraps after you did the field dressing. The scraps were then taken to the altar, and they were presented to God on that never-ending flame as an offering to Him, and that's where the aroma came from. Well, then the meat was actually cooked over that flame, but not allowed to be consumed by the flame. And then the meat was eaten by the priests and the worshipers. Okay? So the internal organs, the heart, if you will, of the animal was given to God as a sacrifice, a memorial offering. The meat was cooked on that fire as a memorial to God. And then it was shared between the priests and the worshipers. This is the only one of the 5 sacrifices in which the one bringing the offering gets to share in the offering, gets to eat the meat or whatever the offering is. So you got God and man sharing a feast together, being fed off of the same offering. It's a fellowship. It's a communion between God and God's creation. So, Wednesday night meals at the church. Kind of started off by talking about that. Our ministry has a rich tradition of that. The first church that we started that ministry at that church. They didn't have it before we got there. We had it at our home church at some level, not necessarily weekly, but when we got to our first appointment, we thought, that'd be good. So we initiated it there. I'll be honest, we tried several approaches to it. We tried asking people to do reservations in advance. We tried catering the meal. We tried weekly sign-ups. We tried charging a flat fee. We tried all sorts of possibilities that first year to kind of see what is it that's going to work. Now, we eventually settled on a program that looks pretty much identical to what we're doing here. You know, you make a meal, you make it known, whoever shows up, everybody's welcome. There's a free will offering that goes toward something, but there's no fee. You can come and eat and not pay a dime, and again, anybody's welcome. That's kind of it. And it became a pretty popular ministry at the church we served at the time. I think, because that church has grown astronomically, I think they no longer offer it in the same way, but they still offer something that doesn't really look like what we did when we were there. But it was very popular while we were there. Well, we took that concept to the second church we served. We started out with once a month, decided that weekly was too big of a bite, no pun intended, to take at the beginning. So we started once a month. Then we moved to once every 2 weeks. And then by the time we hit season number 2 there, school year number 2, we had moved it all the way to once a week. And it stayed that way, again, very similar to what we are doing here. Same scenario, everybody welcome, free will offering, other programming after the meal. And it became very popular there, and based on their newsletter, I just looked, that church is still doing that, and it seems to be doing quite well. Well, then we came here, and you guys were already doing it, which was awesome. And it was actually already pretty doggone similar to what we were used to, and so we were pretty excited, A, to not have to start it again, but B, to see that you guys were already embracing that before we ever got here. And the truth is that model is somewhat common among churches. I have no idea statistically what percentage of Christian churches around the nation actually offer that ministry, but I will say that we are far, and I do mean far, from the only church or the first pastor and their family to come up with the idea. I mean, we didn't invent the idea. We're not the only ones to do it. But it's a great ministry. It's also a great deal of work. Requires a pretty major commitment in the sense of manpower and funding to make it happen. And yet I believe it is one of the most powerful ministries that you can find in a church. And I've had pastors question that. And their question always is, why? Why do you think it's so powerful? And then those who question it love to follow it up with, does it really further the mission of the church? And they're used to asking that way, and I'm convinced, I'm going to be blunt, I'm convinced that they're used to asking because A, they don't think it would work at their church. B, they don't really want to make it work at their church. Or C, they tried it and it didn't work at their church, and therefore they're automatically kind of against it. So pastors tend to fall back on, well, I don't think that furthers the mission of the church. That's often code for, we tried it and we failed. So they will say, how does that further the mission of your church? Well, first you got to find out what the mission of your church is. And I find that a lot of churches couldn't tell you. I think most of us know what the mission of our church is, and if you don't know, it's short and sweet and right there on that banner. We make mention of it a lot. I think if I polled the studio audience and asked a random 100 of you on any given Sunday morning, the vast majority of you, without looking at the wall, would be able to tell me. But right now, let's say it together. We exist to connect people to Jesus Christ. It's short, it's sweet, it's hard to misunderstand. It's simple. It's not easy, always, but it's simple. We exist to connect people with Jesus Christ. That's the yardstick by which we measure what we do here. And something might be a great idea. You know, somebody might come to me with a great idea about something to do, but to be honest, if it doesn't further the ministry of our church, I have to question that, and usually we'll say that's a great idea, but I don't think it's something that we're gonna support, because we are about supporting that mission. So then, okay, how does walking taco night or hot chicken salad Sunday afternoon, how does that connect people to Jesus Christ? That's the $64 question. It's through this offering, this sacrifice that we're talking about today, through the peace sacrifice. Because the offering is prepared, just like in the book of Leviticus. May not be livestock that's brought in and sacrificed in field dress, thank goodness, but it's prepared nonetheless. It's then shared with both God through a free will offering that supports something. That something is going to be different from church to church, but that free will offering is going to support something in the church. And it's earmarked for other ministries. And we're trying to keep it that way. We're trying to keep it so anything you happen to drop in a basket goes towards something other than the budget. Today, there'll be a free will offering, or maybe there won't be. The All Church Breakfast had a free will offering, and that was for the capital campaign. Our Wednesday night meals have a free will offering, and those are for missions beyond the walls of this church even. But earmarked for something that is the sacrifice to God part. And then we break bread together, and we do it in the name of God. We do that because of God, because there is great power in what seminaries like to describe as table sharing. Coming together, whether it's at a meal in the dining room or whether it's communion, is referred to as table sharing in a church. And the Old and New Testaments are both built strongly around the concept of table sharing. Why is that? Because there's an intimacy that happens around a table when people are breaking bread together that doesn't happen quite that same way in any other facet of life. That's why we try really hard as a family to sit down together at least once a day and share a meal together rather than catch something on the run, because there's an intimacy around breaking bread together. There's that old joke that kids were encouraged to bring something to school to share that illustrates their faith. And little Timmy was first, and he stood up and he said, "I'm Jewish, and this is my yarmulke." And then it was little Sarah's turn, and she stood up and she said, I'm Catholic, and this is my rosary. And then it was little Billy's turn, and he stood up and he said, I'm Methodist, and this is my casserole. But you know, there is great power in sharing a common meal. It's a basic human need that unites all of us regardless of race, creed, color, gender, anything you want to divide us by. Table sharing unites us. When we connect with other people, when we share with other people, we connect with God as well. When we break bread together, we are carrying out the third sacrifice, the peace sacrifice. Even if we don't realize it consciously. Why is that? Because it's all about praise and thanksgiving. So today, this year, as we get ready to move into the fall, don't see something as seemingly mundane as a meal at church as just another hour that you are being asked to be in the building. Instead, see it as an opportunity to participate in a powerful example of the peace offering, the peace sacrifice, breaking bread together. Would you pray with me? Father God, thank you. Thank you for this third sacrifice. And I pray that you would remind us of the power of something as simple as sitting down together over a meal. It sounds simple, gosh, we do it all the time in different settings, and yet it is powerful. It's so powerful that it's a multi-billion-dollar industry in this country. Help us to see it as a way to connect people with you and as a way to connect with each other. Bless the gifts as we bring them to you now, and I pray that these gifts help fund, these powerful ministries that include the sacrifice of peace as we come together. It is in your name that we pray this day and every day. Amen.